She Who Dares Wins. Can you tell me how you've dared and won?
When I became a captain, there were fewer than 400 female airline captains in the world. When I was on Inside the Cockpit, the ITV documentary I was in, one of the comments on social media was, does she ever brush her hair? And I was like, well, obviously I brush my hair, and I have had situations where people have told me really upsetting things. And my first reaction isn't to burst into tears and start, wailing and thinking the world is coming to an end. I have to process it differently. Mm-hmm. So I do process it and I do get emotional about things, but later. So when you work at a desk, if you've got something big going on in your personal life, you can probably carry it and still focus on your job. You can't do that when you're flying. So I used to switch from being Mummy Emma to being Captain Emma. My last flight was to Luxembourg on the 16th of March 2020. Our passengers wished us good luck instead of goodbye as they got off.
Hello and welcome back to the She Who Dares Wins podcast, and my guest today is Emma. Welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to be back in my university town.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah. Leeds is pretty epic. Otley Run.
Yeah. Worked in Woodies.
Right. Oh, wow.
Husband worked in the Sky Rack.
Oh, wow. Okay, we need to come on to that.
Did the Otley Run for my hen night.
Leeds local. I love that you know that. All right, we're going to dive in with the first question. She Who Dares Wins. Can you tell me how you've dared and won?
I think my whole life has been daring and winning, really, because I dared to push the boat out and decide I was going to be a pilot in a world where, I don't come from a flying background. Didn't really know how to get into that. And at the time I started flying, there were even fewer female pilots than there are now, and there's still not very many. And yet I managed to get all the way to becoming an airline captain. So I think that's one of the ways I've dared and won. But I also made a difficult but brave and right decision during 2020 to walk away from my rock star salary as an airline captain and run the charity that I founded, which was another big, bold move, really, because we were facing massive challenges in the airline industry because the bottom had fallen out of our world, really. And I decided that I was going to set up a charity. It didn't start with, I'm going to set up a charity. It started with aircrew can help support NHS staff.
Okay.
But, in the middle of a pandemic with no money and no real means of going out and telling people about what we were doing, we somehow managed to get 6,500 people across the country to support what we wanted to do with supporting the NHS.
Amazing. I want to come on to Project Wingman, but what you said there about starting out and becoming an airline pilot, where did that come from?
When I was 10, well, before that, I think, really, I was always fascinated by things that flew. So my mum's a teacher, so we always got to go to the Science Museum in London for fun days out as a family. And one of the places we went to was to Stansted one weekend because Space Shuttle Enterprise had come into land on the back of a 747. Oh. And in those days, you could just drive to park on the grass in Stansted. When I say in those days, I know it makes me sound like my nana. I am only in my 50s, but, but you could just drive and park on the grass there, and 200,000 people went to see that thing come into land. It was one of the biggest things that happened in the 80s, and I basically saw this thing and I looked up and thought, I want to fly one of them. And I meant the space shuttle. So I looked up everything I could find in the encyclopedia of the world that was about, this thick, sort of a couple of inches thick. And that had everything in it from cavemen to space flight. Because, we didn't have an internet in the 80s. So didn't really know anything about how to become. I thought you had to be American to be an astronaut. I assumed you had to, live in Florida. And I probably didn't even know Florida, actually. I probably just thought, well, America's just somewhere over there. And I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know there was an Air Cadets in my local town. So I didn't know there was such a thing as the Air Cadets because I had a friend at school who was in his Air Cadets, but he lived in a different town quite a long way away from me. And it was just a dream that I kept coming back to, really. But because I didn't know how to do it, and the Air Force never was a consideration for me because I'm not from a military family. I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, it seems like a natural thing if you have pilots that I've known previously that I went to school with me, parents have been in the military. It seems like a natural thing.
Either been in the military or been a civilian pilot. Pilots breed pilots. Although in our case, that's not true, because I'm a pilot, my husband's a navigator, and our children work in insurance, project management and retail. So they have no interest in going into flying at all. But I didn't know how to do it. And my school careers assessment told me I should be a librarian, which would have been the noisiest library in the world. Yeah. So I had decided in the end that I wanted to be a lawyer, because my dad works in insurance, and the corporate financial world was one that I was kind of interested in and knew. And he had a really great corporate lawyer for his business who was really nice to me, really kind to me. I got to know him really well growing up because he was my dad's lawyer. And he offered me a work placement while I was at university. I decided I was going to be a lawyer. He offered me a work placement. I went off to do history at Leeds.
Wow.
And while I was here, I was walking through Freshers' Fair one day, and there was a big sign saying "Learn to fly for free," and it was the University Air Squadron. So I signed up to join that. First, it was like, I look back and I think, why did you do that? I wasn't in any way interested particularly in the military. I'm a Christian and a pacifist. And I was like, why did I decide I was going to join the Air Force? It was because I could learn to fly for free.
Right.
And I signed up. They welcomed me with open arms, because it was the second year that they had allowed women to fly on the front line in our Air Force, which, given that women flew Spitfires around the country during the war, is ridiculous. But there you go. And so they were really wanting to put girl bums on seats. And I don't think that's the only reason I got in. I mean, I'd like to think that I had got there on merit. But I got back to my student house and I thought, what have I done? And I phoned up and I said, I'd like to withdraw my application, please. And they said, OK, no problem. And the next day somebody came round and said, can we have a chat? And I said, yeah. And he said, look, your application is really, really strong. You've got the right personality to join the squadron. We'd really like you to reconsider. So I put my application back in. I thought, it's in the hands of fate. Let's see what happens. And I got onto the squadron and started flying little bulldogs around the skies of Yorkshire.
So that gave you the bug then?
Yeah.
Then how'd you go from that to commercial?
Well, in my case, not very easily or in a straightforward manner, because I basically decided I was going to be a Harrier pilot, because I had brown Harrier pilot boots, because my feet were too small for the black boots that everyone else was issued. And that was my new game plan. But what I hadn't taken into consideration was that on the first night down at RAF Finningley, when we had to go down and have these lectures on a Friday night, and then we'd spend Saturday and Sunday flying, and then we come back to university was the idea. But I was doing a history degree. It was 3 hours a week. So I spent most of my time down at RAF Finningley. And what I hadn't bargained for was walking into the bar on the first Friday night and meeting my first husband, who is still my husband, but I call him my first husband because, I don't want him to get too comfortable. It's our 30th wedding anniversary next month. But I like to keep it fresh.
I like that.
And I met a guy, I met Jim, and 18 months later we got married, 11 days after I graduated.
Wow.
And we moved to the north of Scotland, and that was it. As far as I was concerned, I had put my papers in to join the Air Force, and I was assessed as being marginal for pilot and exceptional for navigator. And they said I got one of the highest nav scores they'd ever seen. And I thought, I don't want to be a navigator. It's not what floats my boat. I want to be a pilot if I'm going to be anything. And if I can't be a pilot, I'm not going to join the Air Force. And I was getting married. And I didn't want to spend the first 3 years of my married life living around Lincolnshire with a husband in the north of Scotland, and not getting married wasn't an option. It was a good decision, as it turns out. He's still my best mate. And so I made the decision that I was going to follow the drum. And at the grand age of 22, I basically stuck two fingers up to female emancipation and moved to the north of Scotland as an Air Force wife, and arranged flowers in the mess and went to ladies' lunches. And I'd had a degree but no skills. I had a degree in history, but I could type, but I didn't know how to do accounting or anything about spreadsheets or anything useful to a business that they could pay me for.
Right.
So I just got little jobs, working in call centres, anything that would pay me a little bit of pocket money, really. And eventually we just said, right, let's have kids, because didn't really know what else to do. Built a house, and I didn't think I'd fly again. That was it. Then in 2003, we got posted to New Zealand, and we spent 3.5 years there on an exchange tour with 5 Squadron. And when I was there, Jim said to me, look, you know, we've got more money out here because we were earning pounds and spending dollars. He said, why don't you take up flying again? So it was really Jim that he literally was the wind beneath my wings, which is corny but true.
Yeah.
And I came back 3.5 years later as a fully qualified commercial pilot.
So that's so interesting to unpack, because I don't think I've had anyone on, and I want to say this without being disrespectful, that the word settled seems wrong, but do you know what I mean? Like that, at that such a young age, had done a degree or wanted to be a pilot, and then
became a housewife.
Yeah, which is pretty awesome, because I think it will show other women that, you know, there isn't this, you know, trajectory of whatever you want to achieve, that you just have to go for it, balls for an all. Like, life changes, basically.
It does. There's no right way round to do things.
Yeah.
And the advantage I've got is that we've never had any money, because, you know, I didn't work for the first 10 years of our marriage. Mm-hmm. But now I'm in my early 50s. My husband's just turned 55. Our kids are 24, 25 and 27.
Yeah,
they're adults that we can have a really great time. You know, so we're still young enough to go and have a really great time with them. We go on holiday together still all the time. We go to the pub with them. I wouldn't say we're best friends, because I don't really believe that parents and children can be best friends. Yeah. But we're young enough to have that sort of active relationship with them that some people don't get to have, because they wait until they're much older to have children. And there's no right way round to do it. There's only the right way round for you to do it. Yeah. Yeah. So for us, you know, we met when we were young. When I told my parents I was going to marry Jim, nobody questioned it. You know, other boyfriends, they were like, oh, darling, do you know what you're doing? Better choices. And I'd be like, what do you mean? Might have had 1 or 2 boyfriends before I met Jim. And nobody, when I met Jim, everybody just knew that we were really great together. Mm. And we're still, you know, even fireworks need support, right? So we are fireworky, but we're still really good friends, and we've had a great life together, and we're only 30 years into it. We've got another at least 30 to go, I reckon. So we made the right decision. But most of my friends, you know, when I was busy having babies in my 20s, all my friends were out clubbing, working, building their careers. I was the only one of my university year to do it that way round, but it's worked for us. Yeah, definitely. So training to go into the commercial world of flying, did you then come back to the UK, and that's where your journey started? Yeah, so I came back with the necessary licenses to fly commercially, but I then had to convert them from New Zealand licenses to what was then called the Joint Aviation Authority. Right. And I had to sit the 16 exams, do a flight test, and then I couldn't get a job, because I wrote to all the airlines and said, please, can I have a job? I'm a pilot, thinking they'd bite my arm off. And only one of them wrote back, and it was GB Airlines, which then was bought by Easyjet about 6 months later. And they wrote back on headed notepaper. I've still got the letter, because it was just such beautiful notepaper. Oh, wow. They said, thank you very much for your letter and application. We're really sorry, but we're not hiring at the moment. And I thought, at least they've written back. Nobody else bothered. And I didn't really know what I was going to do next, but I had done my licence conversion at High Wycombe, and the chief flying instructor there and my instructor there were both involved in what was then called the Guild of Air Pilots and Air Navigators, and it's now called the Honourable Company of Air Pilots, and they did scholarships to become an instructor. So I applied for one of those and I got it. So I became an instructor, did that for 3 years, and then found myself in the right place at the right time, because EasyJet said they were going to take 12 already qualified pilots onto a type rating course. Right. And I don't know how many applicants they had, but a lot. And I was one of the 12 they chose. So that was the start of my EasyJet career. And I stayed there until I would still be there now if it hadn't been for
Oh, really?
COVID. Yeah, absolutely. I always said to my husband once I'd started flying again, if I ever fly commercially, it's going to be for EasyJet, because I just love the whole ethos of the airline, which is basically break the mold, do your own thing, provide what people need rather than what you can make the most money doing. Because they challenged the old guard effectively. They came in and said, well, we're not going to give you free food and drink. You're not going to get a newspaper on board. You're not going to get allocated a seat. You have to pay for your bags. All the things that you took for granted when you flew. Mm-hmm. EasyJet just went, no, absolutely not going to do that. And
I never thought about it like that, but you're quite right, isn't it? That traditionally when you flew on, BA or Virgin, it's quite polished. I guess static's the wrong word. Like it's structured.
It's like the Bank of England versus Revolut.
Yeah, I like it. I like the analogy.
EasyJet is the Revolut of the airline world. And actually, they weren't the first. Air Southwest, or Southwest Airlines
in America. Right.
They were the ones that sort of were the trailblazers for low-cost flying. Uh-huh. And actually, EasyJet is 30 years old now. They launched their first flight the same year that we got married. So I always know how old EasyJet is because it's the same age as our marriage. So over those 30 years, they have become, they started off with a couple of Boeings and a couple of routes from Luton to Scotland. And, the first time I flew on one, I thought it was held together by rubber bands. And I said to Jim, I'm quite scared, actually. But they just went, we're going to wear polo shirts and jeans. That's going to be the cabin crew uniform.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There was none of this designer uniform. I mean, they've really upped their game over the years because they've had to. But one of the things about a company like EasyJet, and I know I don't work for them anymore. I should be a brand ambassador for them, really.
Shout out to EasyJet.
Yeah, tag them. One of the great things about EasyJet is that if they have an idea that they think can make them a little bit of money, they'll try it and see how it goes down. And if it works, they'll keep doing it. And if it doesn't work, they'll stop it. They're really innovative. They're very fast to react. Mm-hmm. It's not a legacy airline or a flag carrier. So their digital online reputation is all they've got.
Right.
So they make it really good. And they make sure that the thing that people want from them is done really, really well. Mm-hmm. And they don't get it right all the time. Nobody does. But I think it's been a really inspirational business model to follow as I've set up my own business as a speaker. Mm-hmm. Because I'm like, well, I don't need to go in and be the flag carrier. I need to go in and be me.
Yeah.
And because my journey is unique to me, like everybody's journey is unique to them, only I can tell my story and only I can share my thoughts in the way that I do.
I think that's really important because I think now with social media, everybody looks to somebody else for a blueprint and let's copy that blueprint. And you're right.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to rely on what makes you unique because that's all we all have.
Well, that's all
right?
you've got. Obviously if you're a famous athlete or a TV star or you come from a rich family or whatever, you've got a platform to help you start off, but it doesn't guarantee you success because if you're spouting stuff that other people are saying all the time, you're not being authentic to who you are. Mm-hmm. So what you see is very much what you get with me.
Yeah.
As we've discussed today, I mean, you have got raw Emma today. Mm-hmm. I'm literally no makeup, slightly hay fevery eyes, flat hair.
But this is life, isn't it? And this is what I think is important.
Well, it doesn't change what I think about the world and it doesn't change what I want to share with the world. Mm-hmm. I don't need to look a certain way or dress a certain way to get my message across. I completely get that there is a brand when you have a business and you need to make sure you're on brand. And obviously if I'm standing on stage in front of a group of people talking about something and I haven't, I have brushed and washed my hair today, but if I didn't brush my hair and I was wearing dirty clothes, then that doesn't match up with the image. That the image doesn't match the message. But equally, I don't have a game face.
Yeah.
What you see is literally what you get.
Yeah. And do you think that comes from being in the industry of being a pilot? In terms of, also actually here's a segue. Do you think if you'd have flown for one of the traditional airlines that your journey would have been a little bit different? Do you think you would have stayed?
Well,
I'm guessing you were the only, like, how many women were flying for EasyJet at the time that you joined?
oh gosh, not many. I mean, there's still fewer than I can't find some exact statistics, but when I became a captain, there were fewer than 400 female airline captains in the world.
Wow.
And when I left EasyJet, that number had only grown to about 500 in the world.
Over a space of how many years?
That was over a space of 5 years.
Right.
But over the last 5 years, I understand that number might have grown to 800. It's still almost nothing.
Minimal. Yeah. And did you was that an issue when you started throughout your career? Did you?
Not for me.
No.
But I think partly because I was in my 30s with children and a mortgage when I first started. So I was the same age, if not older, than some of the captains I was flying with. And it just gave us some common ground. Mm-hmm. So, and because I've done stuff, I have conversation. And I've met so many people that don't have a lot to say. They don't have a lot to talk about, mm-hmm. because particularly pilots, they think that all they need to do is know everything there is to know about aviation. And that can make an Amsterdam flight feel like a Tel Aviv, can make it feel like a really long day out if you've got nothing interesting to say.
Yeah, no, you don't think about that. But if you're in a cockpit with someone who is very good at flying but has... can you be good at flying and have poor communication skills?
Yeah, absolutely you can.
Right.
But you need to be able to, the communication skills you need to be a really good pilot. I mean, obviously you need to be able to communicate verbally with the ground. So you need good radio communication skills. And you need to be able to communicate with your crew, particularly in an emergency. But the number of people I've sat next to who, they're young and they just don't know how to have conversation. Having said that, I've also sat next to some really young first officers who are they're setting the world on fire. They're just so interesting. They're into so many things and they've just got really interesting chat.
Yeah.
And you find out loads. And I used to come back with a new app every time because I'd be like, oh, that's great. That's going to make my life easier, But going back to what you were sort of asking about if I had gone to a traditional airline, I don't think it would have made any difference. I did have a BA scholarship to go down to Prestwick in 1996 and become a pilot, and I turned it down because Prestwick was 4 hours from where I lived, and people now are aghast when I say that. But, phones were attached to walls, FaceTime was what we're doing now.
Yeah.
It was a different world then, and it was the right decision. But I don't think it would have made any difference because my role on board an aircraft is to fly the aircraft. It's not to look pretty in front of you. Mm-hmm. So when I was on Inside the Cockpit, the ITV documentary I was in, one of the comments on social media was, does she ever brush her hair? And I was like, well, obviously I brush my hair, but if you're in the driest environment, the environment in a flight deck is drier than Death Valley. I happen to have fine hair, and when you're putting a headset on and off all the time, it gets a bit messy. It does not in any way affect my ability to fly a plane,
Yeah.
So...
in counter to that, I remember watching that programme and then I rewatched some this morning because you've got some clips on your website. And I remember watching that and in my head was, oh my God, that pilot looks so young. I don't. And I actually, there was a point, and I'll be honest, where I didn't want to fly. We used to go skiing a lot and I didn't want to fly to Europe on a cheap airline because of worrying about pilot's age. And I had this stick, and it's terrible. You'll probably hate me for
You
this.
want to worry more about the menopausal women flying, to be honest with you.
I only fly BA or Virgin because I had a friend at school who became a pilot. He was RAF and then became a pilot, and he was BA. He was very assertive in his abilities. But he always said to me, well, the best only fly BA Virgin, and we have to go through so much, and we're mostly ex-military. And then I just thought of EasyJet and these budget airlines as, they've not got in the back door, but not enough experiences. And I know that's totally incorrect now because I was poorly educated on the whole system and what it takes to become a pilot. And I will just interject with a funny story that I had. It's not funny, actually. It's pretty horrific. But we were flying somewhere and we walked onto the plane and there was a female pilot and she was quite young. And someone in front of me, and if it had been now, my tongue is way sharper, I'd have cut them down. But they actually said to her face, do you think, are you going to need somebody to park this?
Oh, I used to get that all the time.
I was like,
all the time.
You hadn't even got in the air. I was like...
Especially if I had female first officer. It's like, who's going to park it, love? And I'd be like, I will be parking you off this aircraft if you want to say that to me. Although actually, I didn't used to say that to people because what's happening there is there are so few female pilots that it's really unusual for anyone to ever see one.
Yeah.
And what's happening there is that somebody is trying to acknowledge the fact that you're not a man, but they don't know what to say. So they say some really crap sexist comment because they think it's funny.
Yeah.
And that's their way of saying, oh, you're a female pilot. Yeah. Congratulations. And it comes out as, oh, who's going to park the plane then? And do you need a man in there? And my response to that was always, oh, thank God you've offered. Are you qualified? And
yeah.
Or I'd say something like, well, at least I don't have to reverse, And I would just banter back.
Yeah.
I chose not to be offended by that, but I know a lot of female pilots who are like, it's absolutely ridiculous that they were saying that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, come on, I have always taken it as somebody just wanting to acknowledge the fact that you are not a man.
Yeah. I did the same in construction. It was common. And looking back on it, I used to say to the younger girls, don't take it to heart because it's not what they're used to.
No.
There's no malice in it.
And you must have had it all the time. I mean, a very, very similar environment where you're probably the only girl in the workforce at any one time.
Yeah.
And the other girls that are there are probably quite young and inexperienced because they're just starting, schools are just starting to realise that you don't have to have a gender to have a job. I mean, people have been saying it for years, but I think we're only just seeing that primary school education of, there is no gender attached to jobs. Mm-hmm. We're only just seeing that come through into the workforce now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it is so important. So the skills then to be a pilot, it fascinates me, and I think probably from a little bit of my fear of flying, even though I've taken ridiculous amounts of flights, but it kind of still never goes. But I think for me, it's the control element. But you're in an environment which has structure, but you also have to be able to cope when things go wrong, and critical thinking all ties into it. What are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned from your flying career?
You need to make sure that you aren't carrying extra baggage when you go to work. So when you work at a desk, if you've got something big going on in your personal life, you can probably carry it and still focus on your job. You can't do that when you're flying. So I used to switch from being Mummy Emma to being Captain Emma in the car on the way to work. And that was the play. And I'd say to the kids, I'm flying today, I'm not available. And I always would say to first officers, switch your phone off and leave it off all day. And because there's a tendency, I mean, you're supposed to switch it off when you're at work anyway, but there's always been a tendency for people to sort of check their messages in the turnaround down route. And I'm like, well, if you turn your phone on and find that your cat's just been run over, or
mentally it's going to affect you for the flight. Yeah,
absolutely it is. And so, it's different. You have to throw yourself into it. You can't just pull over on the side of the road when you're in an aircraft. There isn't that option. So you've got to be mentally fit as well as physically fit to do the job. And I think that's probably... I have flown with people, having said that, who've got massive things going on at home. There was one captain in particular who had a very ill child, and he came to work because it was a break from that. Because you do become emotionally detached from things. And I actually had this conversation yesterday with somebody about a very similar thing, because I have to remember to reattach myself. So if somebody comes to me and tells me something shocking or awful or really difficult, I just don't... It's not that I don't care, but I don't get emotional about it because I'm already processing it and going, okay, how do we fix this?
Right, okay, so critical thinking leads back into your personal life.
100% it does, which is great until your children say, you can sometimes show emotion. And it's not that I don't, it's just that I don't, you know, and I have had situations where people have told me really upsetting things. And my first reaction isn't to burst into tears and start, you know, wailing and thinking the world is coming to an end. I have to process it differently. Mm-hmm. So I do process it and I do get emotional about things, but later, after I've listened to the problem, helped where I can, and signposted if I can't help. Later on, I'll then download to my husband, or I'll talk to someone else about it away from the situation. And that, I think, is a very pilot trait.
Okay.
Because I know lots of people who, you know, from my world, who say the same thing, that they have to remember to reconnect. You know, in the drive home, you have to sort of almost reconnect and go back to being Mummy Emma rather than Pilot Emma.
Okay. And that way of thinking, when COVID happened and, you know, everyone was grounded, I guess you're in a situation where you're thinking, shit, like, what's the next step? Was that very much the case for you? Let's push emotion aside and think, how do I move forward? How did Project Wingman come from that? Because I remember actually seeing a lot of pilots online saying, what do I do?
Yeah.
You know, pilots are high earners, probably in some cases the breadwinner in a family, to just be grounded and to not ever really know when you'd be back flying.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you jumped straight into action.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
But I could see the news about COVID started to break in sort of November 2019.
Yes.
We started to hear about, and everybody thought it was going to be another bird flu or SARS or swine flu or something like that. But it started in my head to become obvious that this was going to be a much, much bigger problem. I don't know why. I could completely see that this was going to be catastrophic for our industry. And we'd had a great year in 2019. The aviation industry had a great year. I'd had a great year because that was when Inside the Cockpit had been released. I became Captain Emma. People were contacting me all the time saying, how do I get to be a pilot? You're so inspiring. And I helped everybody I could. And I still meet people now who say, I'm only a pilot because of you.
Oh, wow.
Which is amazing. That's such an amazing legacy.
Yeah.
But aviation had a great year. And 2020 was expected to be a boom year for aviation. Everybody wanted to go flying. Everyone wanted to travel. I personally, I was loving life. I'd just gone down to 75%. I was finding that work-life balance that I needed. And then, of course, we all know what happened in 2020. But I could see, as we went into January and then February and towards by March, for me, it was obvious that this wasn't going to just be a flash in the pan, grounding for a couple of weeks. For me, I could see it was going to be a really, really big deal for the aviation industry. And at the same time, we were being told every day that the NHS was about to face its biggest nightmare since its inception. And I thought, well, I was already thinking, well, we're all trained. We all have a degree of first aid training. Cabin crew have a greater degree of first aid training. We must be able to help in some way. And that was my initial thought, is we're all first aid trained. Perhaps we can support the NHS in that way. But I was also a peer support mentor at Easyjet. And that became mandatory. And I was one of the first people to sign up and become a mentor. So I knew a professor of psychology who is Professor Rob Bohr, he's affiliated with Royal Free Hospital, but he oversees with his company the peer support systems at Easyjet and British Airways. And I spoke to him and said, Rob, I think we can help. And he said, yeah, I know someone else who's saying the same thing. And he introduced me to a BA captain called Dave. And we had this chat. And bizarrely, I never met Dave until a few weeks ago when we closed the charity and he came to the wrap party at the RAF Club. Oh. I'd never met him face to face because I had this conversation with him and he said, yep, this is what I'm thinking. And I said, well, this is what I'm thinking. And I hadn't realised that it was such a quick time. It was only 2 weeks between that first conversation and us opening our first lounge. That's how hard we hit it. So I came home from work. My last flight was to Luxembourg on the 16th of March, 2020. Our passengers wished us good luck instead of goodbye as they got off. And I came home on empty trains, planes and roads to get back to Inverness.
Was that just before lockdown?
Just before.
Yeah.
And I was supposed to go back down to Gatwick and fly to Italy a few days later. And I called my base manager and said, I'm not going. I'm not doing that. There's no way it's safe. I don't want to get stuck down there. We're going to go into lockdown. And she went, absolutely. There's loads of pilots around who are just desperate to fly. Stay where you are, which was a great decision because I wouldn't have got home if I'd have gone. And so I threw myself, but I was lost. I was like, well, what am I going to do if I'm not, who am I going to be? What will I, after the initial couple of days of, I don't have to go to work, I just thought, oh my God, what am I going to actually do now? So threw myself into this setting up of this charity. We wrote manuals. We wrote manuals for the hospitals so they knew what to expect. We came up with a game plan. We did risk assessments. We wrote manuals for the volunteers. We wrote manuals for team leaders. I had the platform, so and Dave had the NHS connections. So I just put a message on, Workplace, Facebook, LinkedIn, all the social media platforms I was on, and said, "This is what we're going to do. If you're interested, I've set up a Gmail account, please email," thinking we'd get 30 or 40 people. And in 3 days, we had 750 people had signed up to help. And I was out of my depth. So I contacted, a friend contacted me who had been working for Flybe, which had collapsed in the January. Oh. And she was the first person to come on board at Wingman as a member of the back office team. She became a director of the charity. And she's a girl, Esther, that I had been flying. We'd both been flying instructors together years and years before. So it kind of just all happened very, very quickly. And I was just immersed in it for 18 hours a day, every day for weeks and weeks, as we set up lounge after lounge until we had 104 lounges across the UK.
So were the lounges in the airport?
No, in the hospitals.
So we'd go
into a hospital and say, give us a space that's big enough to practice social distancing. Because in the beginning, we didn't need masks or anything because, as long as you didn't stand up.
Was that ever a fear? Like you knew something was going on. You didn't necessarily know the full impact of COVID because I don't think at the start people weren't hospitalised straight away, or if they were, it wasn't very publicised.
But we could see what was happening in Italy, and they had people dying on the streets because their hospitals were overrun.
Did fear ever come into it?
No.
For your own health and safety?
No. So for one thing, for my health and safety, no, because I was at home. I wasn't going into hospitals because I didn't live near anyone.
Oh, okay.
So we did have a lounge in my local hospital, and I went in there. But even when I went in there, it didn't worry me at all.
Right.
Because it didn't need. It was a calculated risk.
Right.
And the setting up of the whole charity was based on that calculated risk and boldness to do something.
Right.
If we'd have waited to see what happened and worried, the charity probably would have never got off the ground. I think that its success was based on the fact that Dave and I both had the same mission in mind, and we both had the same mindset to just say, right, well, let's just do it and we'll adapt as we need to. Because that's what we do for our jobs.
Yeah, it's very much aligned with the quick thinking.
Absolutely. Decision making and change management is our bread and butter. So everybody thinks that it's the actual flying of the aircraft. It's the management of the system that we do. And it's the management of the day that you do as a captain. So we're always decision making. We're always weighing up risk versus benefit. And that's what we did with Project Wingman. We just said, okay, we know that there is a risk to sending people into an unknown situation in hospital. We know one of the risks was, what if somebody trips over and breaks their leg on the way to do something for us? And we looked into it and went, okay, well, actually, they're volunteers. It's not our liability. And once they're on hospital premises, that becomes the hospital's liability. So we don't need professional indemnity insurance. We don't need public liability insurance. We found out what we needed. And every time we didn't know something, we went and asked someone who did. And that was something I learned from Dame Carolyn McCall, who was the CEO of Easyjet for most of my career. She came in from The Guardian and said, I don't know how to run an airline, but I know how to run a business successfully. I will surround myself with people who know how to run an And she did. And she took the share price from £2.19 to £19.24 or whatever it was the day before Brexit, because she knew how to run a business. And I've always been really inspired by her openly saying, I don't know how to do this bit of the job, but this is what I can do for you. So with everything we did with Wingman, I just said, well, I don't know how to do that. Let's get someone in who does.
Yeah. I love that because it's taking out the ego that sometimes you do get in the business world of, you know, I know how to do this and I know how to, and actually that works, doesn't it? When you go in there and you say, well, okay, there are people here that are better than me in certain aspects of things. I will use that to my advantage.
And more than that, because I took responsibility. So I gave people, I empowered people to do the jobs I'd asked them to do, but I had their backs because at the end of the day, it was on me. So Dave actually left the charity quite quickly. He had other priorities. So he and I set the charity up. And that's one of the reasons I never met him until recently. And I'm so delighted that he was there at the end because he was there at the beginning.
Yeah.
But he left and I then found myself left holding the baby effectively. So I became CEO of the charity and left running it. And it was really important to me that it was kind of run a bit like a flight deck. I was like, well, I'm in charge. Absolutely. I will carry the can if things go wrong. But you all have the power to make your own decisions and do things in the best way for you, that you need to make it work. This is the mission. How you reach that goal is entirely up to you. So if in one environment, if in Birmingham you need to do it this way because there's 4 massive hospitals that we're serving, that's fine. If in Elgin, which is my local town, you need to do it a different way because it's much smaller and it's a different sort of environment and we all know each other, that's fine. Here are the guides. These are the things you must do. Here's your manual. Mm-hmm. The way you do those things is up to you. So it was a really incredible experience to be flying that plane, to be captaining that ship, because people allowed me to run it in the way that I felt was the right way. And I surrounded myself with people who had skills I didn't have.
Yeah, what comes across is that throughout, obviously, you're being a pilot and then the project that you've done after is, and still the stuff you do now with public speaking, is that leadership seems to be in the core of your, like, who you are and your ability. Are there any misconceptions about what it takes to be a good leader?
Definitely.
Can you tell me?
I think that people who think they're good leaders are often managers, and there's a difference.
Okay.
So you don't need to have leadership in your title to lead. And if you have leadership in your title, it doesn't necessarily mean you're good at it. And quite often, I actually had this conversation with somebody recently who's quite close to me, so I'm not going to say who it is. But we were skiing, and they were out the front, and they didn't wait to see if everybody was keeping up with them. And they claimed their claim was, well, I'm the leader, I'm a great leader. My job is leadership. And I said, no, actually, you're a manager. I'm the leader at the moment because I'm at the back making sure everybody comes with us. And I think, and they hadn't appreciated that actually to lead, I talk about leading from the front, but actually leading from the front means you're the last one off the burning plane. That's what the role of the captain is. If your plane catches fire and you have to evacuate, the last person off that aircraft is the captain, and they have to go from the front of the aircraft all the way through to the back to make sure that there's nobody left on board before they get off the aircraft. That's leadership. That's leadership. It's taking everyone with you, making sure that you've got everyone's backs, and people don't appreciate that. And I think also people think that you're born with leadership skills, and I don't necessarily think that that's true. I think there are absolutely people who are just natural born leaders, and they don't do it in an arrogant way. They just give you that confidence that it's okay to follow them because you just know that they've got your back. But there are also skills you can learn to make sure that you are leading effectively. You've just got to have the right frame of mind to be willing to take those things on board. So, listening, for example, a lot of people don't know how to listen. They think they do, but they're not actually hearing what's being said. And I think that's one of the most important leadership skills, is listening to feedback and being willing to take it on board, even when you don't like it, and then doing something about it. doing the right thing all of the time, even when no one's watching. That's a leadership skill for me. Mm-hmm. You know, management is telling people what to do in a certain way because you are the one that thinks that they're in charge. But you'll find that actually the leader in that group is usually somebody who has been told what to do and just kind of does it their own way because they know it's going to be better.
Yeah, and I think leaders also, you need to be inspired by a leader and not necessarily by a manager. Like, I feel like they are...
Absolutely. Leaders are creative generally. They're there to provide the vision. They're there to guide and sort of steer the ship, literally. Managers are the doers. And leaders can't... I personally don't think that you can be a successful leader and be the one that does everything. Mm. You know, you have to outsource things because your skill is leadership. Your skill isn't necessarily the doing. Mm. And I think that people who are managers that think they're leaders think that they are great leaders because they're doing everything. Whereas I think actually you're sitting over the top of everything as a leader and you kind of know everything about the operation, but not necessarily in great detail.
It's fascinating. And now you do public speaking, and so that you did Project Wingman, and then you got an award in an MBE.
I did.
It's amazing. And then that kind of threw you into the world of sharing your story. But what are you most passionate about? Because I believe that everyone that shares a story wants to help other people. It's not just an ego thing of here's my story and how amazing I am. I never really see that in speakers that are as true as you are. What's the underlining drive? What do you want to help? Like, when you go and do these talks for you, what do you want to get across?
Well, when I left flying, I realised, I say left flying, you never really leave flying. I'm going to go back to it later this year, but not commercially, before anyone gets excited.
Pilot Emmett's not returning to Easyjet.
Captain Emmett is not going to be a thing anymore. But when I stopped flying for Easyjet, I felt that I had a lot of skills and knowledge and experience that I didn't want to go to waste. So there's some really valuable lessons that I've learned about leadership. And one of the most important lessons is that I failed my first attempt at becoming a captain. We don't talk about failure because it's a bit uncomfortable, isn't it? And nobody wants to admit that they're not very good at something. And the reasons for me failing my command are a keynote speech in itself. But I took ownership of it, and that inspired a lot of people because I wasn't blaming everybody else. Mm. And I think we're quite quick to blame people when things go wrong, and I don't. I look at what I've done wrong and work out what I can do better the next time. So there are lessons that I've learned that other people can benefit from without having to go through the agonising pain of failing the most important thing that you've ever done in your life and having to wish that the ground would swallow you up when people come and congratulate you in the crew room, not realising that you're there to be retrained back into the right-hand seat instead of because you're about to become a captain. So for me, and this is going to sound a little bit like a pitch for Miss Murray 2025, not that I'm old maid Murray maybe, but I just want to make other people's worlds better. I want to leave the world better than I found it. Okay. And I can't change the world. None of us can change the world. I can change the corner of the world I sit in. And the ripple effect of that will do the rest of the work. So that is why I work as a professional speaker. So there's a slight difference. Public speaking is generally people who are promoting good local community things or whatever. Professional speaking is somebody who has information and skill and expertise, who gets paid to speak about it.
Okay, to
share. I've
So
set up my business as a professional speaker. And I've found out since I left aviation, and having grown up really as a military wife as well, everybody in my world has always been good decision makers because they're military or because they fly. But actually in business, people don't know how to make decisions, which is great for me because I go in and help them and say, right, this is a decision-making tool that you can use immediately and forever. And if it's simple enough for even a pilot to use it, you can use it. So that's one of the things I talk about. But I basically go in and solve people's problems by sharing lessons and experience from the flight deck. And the difference between what I do and what other leadership speakers do is I don't have leadership theory. I have leadership experience. So it's all from my experience as a pilot, my experience as a captain, my experience running the charity. Actually, my experience as a mother of 3 children who moved 12,000 miles away when they were, 20 months, 3 and 5. My experience of being a military wife for 30 years, all of those things tied together have given me knowledge that other people find useful. So it's literally about making things better for other people in the only way I now can, because I'm not, I used to make life better for people by flying them on holiday, which sounds a bit trite, but actually if you've saved up for that holiday for 2 years and it's the one break you get with your partner or your family, that makes your life better.
Yeah.
So, it kind of used to be about that. It's a little bit more, it's a little bit further reaching perhaps now.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. And I think leading from experience rather than textbook knowledge.
Yeah, and I need to know some of the theory so I can explain it in terms that people understand who've done MBAs and, gone that route. But, if you look at some of the most successful business leaders,
they haven't. Yeah.
They haven't done that. Richard Branson didn't go to business school. The CEO of Jet2 that have just announced sponsored pilot training, he didn't. He started from the bottom and worked his way up. He's a local Leeds lad. So he worked his way up, and really successful people like that don't necessarily build their empires on theory. They get on and do the job. And that's very much what I've always had as a mantra, really, is, it never occurred to me I couldn't be a pilot because I was a woman. That thought never crossed my mind. And it turns out it shouldn't have done either. So that was a good decision. But whenever I've decided to do something, it has never crossed my mind that I can't do it.
Yeah.
So I tend to, when I decide to do something, I go all in with it. And, that seems to be something that works.
Yeah.
So I don't believe in doing things half-heartedly. And I want to leave a bit of a legacy that people understand how to be in this world in a better way than they did when I first started doing it. And it's not just about traditional leadership. It's about giving back to society as well. That's what Project Wingman was all about. It was about a group of beleaguered aircrew facing an abyss and choosing to reach out and help other people, another group of beleaguered people, which was NHS frontline workers, who, getting out of bed every day to do something they didn't have to do for people they didn't know.
It's giving back, isn't it?
It's giving back. And we really, really need to make sure we're still giving back, because I think we've all got a little bit lazy at it. It's always the same people that turn up to do kids' football on a Sunday morning, tend the gardens in churches, run brownies, do the local gymnastics class, do local swimming lessons, whatever. We need to encourage that in the next generation of people who can make society better by it not always being centred on us. It's not about what I can do for me. It's about what we can do for everybody else. Mm-hmm. So it's not about me. It's the same on stage, as you said. Telling your story is never about. My story is never about me. The story obviously is about me, but it's about what you can learn from the stories I tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on that, just to finish, because I know we're tight with time today, based on who you've spoken to over the years, which are, is going to be everyone that's been on a plane and people that you do your talks for, what's the one thing that you wish you could kind of say to, and we'll aim this specifically to women, is there anything that women come up to you with issues of, and you wish that you could just say, one thing to them?
Yeah. And that is, if you want to do it and you're willing to put the work in, don't let anyone tell you you can't, because actually we're all much more capable than we give ourselves credit for. And we don't need to be comparing ourselves with other people because they have a different pair of shoes to wear than we do. All you ever need to do is compare yourself with where you were a year ago. So you don't need to be like someone else, because you are valuable to the world that you want to change in your own right. You don't need to become Emma Henderson in order to become a speaker. You know, you don't need to become Emma Henderson in order to become a pilot. You don't need to behave like me. You need to behave like you, and just show up as your whole self. And that's all you need to do. So just have that belief. As soon as that doubt starts to creep in that you might not be able to do something, kick it into touch, because it's, you know, there's the chimp paradox book I love. Literally, that chimp sitting on your shoulder, you can push it off. You don't have to have it sit. You don't have to let it sit there. You don't have to give it any room in your head. And I think a lot of women particularly think that they can't do things because, you know, women carry this guilt. And I know you're a mother as well. You know, is it selfish of me to have sent my children to boarding school so that I could go off and become a pilot? Possibly. But what's it shown my children about the role of women in society? It's shown them that mums can have kick-ass careers as well, and that they can go off and achieve anything they want to. So, you know, you can't have everything. You have to make a choice. I mean, this is not one thing, is it? This is several things I'm coming up with.
No, but it's so true. Like I feel everything that you've said is things that I get women contact me about, and a lot of it is guilt, and then looking at other people and comparison. Becky was on the show, said comparison is a thief of joy, which is so true.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that, you know, generational, we've probably all gone through, but now seems to be a real issue.
Well, it is. And of course, you know, there were times when I would be flying and people would say, do you not miss your children? And, you know, when they were teenagers, I was like, no.
However many thousand feet,
why would I do that?
Place to be.
But nobody ever said to my husband, who's in the Air Force, nobody, when he deployed for 6 months, nobody ever said, do you not think that's a bit selfish? It's like, why would somebody ask me that because I'm a woman? You know, so you can't have everything. Our sacrifice that we made was that we needed childcare and education. So we had the opportunity to put our children into boarding school, which was near our house, and then we got sent away to England. Sorry, kids. They said, thanks so much for putting us into boarding school, then moving to England and moving back home just as we all left. I was like,
so
you're
did
welcome.
they board in New Zealand?
No, that was in Scotland. So they went to Gordonston,
okay.
which is 6 miles away from our house.
And then...
And 3 months after they started there, we got posted down to London, and we bounced around London, a couple of places in London, then Lincolnshire, and we came home as the youngest one was leaving. She had about a year and a half left of school when we went back home. And so now the joke is always on Mother's Day, they're always like, oh yeah, we must send matron a card. So I swear at them generally when they say that.
I love that. Listen, I love that you are unapologetically you, that you're giving back, that you've done so many amazing things, but you'll take it in your stride as well. You're not someone that is, you know, you have a story, and there's a key trajectory of helping people, which I think is fascinating, and you've definitely dared and won. So thank you so much for sharing your story and doing what you do.
My absolute pleasure. And if anybody would like to read more about my story, I published a book last year called Grounded.
Okay.
My children actually keep me very grounded. I think I don't get the opportunity to get big-headed because I'm totally taken out by my middle child, my daughter, my eldest daughter, and not for lunch. But Grounded is the title of my book. It's not a leadership book. It's the story of my journey into, through and out of aviation and what I went on to do next.
Okay.
So there are a lot of leadership stories in there, but it's on Amazon.
I'll put a link down in the description.
Great.
Grab that.
If you want a signed copy, I'll give you another link.
Amazing. Awesome.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been brilliant to be here.
Absolutely welcome.